Okay, so hello and welcome back. So hopefully my audio is a little better. Move my microphone closer and did some stuff. Hopefully, please tell me if it is. Otherwise, we're going to be reacting to the Battle of the Nations 1813 in Napoleon when he is in Germany and about to get wrecked, or at least set upon by everyone. The original video is in the description. If you do not like me pausing to explain a lot of stuff, go watch the original video. I don't know how long this video turned out yet. Probably over an hour and 10 minutes, considering this is a 33-minute video and I like to hear myself talk. So, go leave them a like and watch that video if you do not like me pausing. If you are comfortable with me, then we will continue. I'll ask right now that you like and subscribe if you like this content, because I guarantee you I will forget to ask for that when we are playing. So, other than those two things, let's get going, boys. We have a very good video in front of us, I guarantee you. Between a battle lost and a battle won, the distance is immense, and there stand empires. He's not wrong. Between a battle lost and a battle won, so.
October 1813.
A last point before we stop, pausing. Rome, late Rome, especially the West. Won a few more battles, might have still existed for a little bit longer. But
Napoleon Bonaparte faced his greatest crisis since becoming Emperor of the French 9 years before. His long war in Spain had ended in defeat, and an Anglo-Spanish-Portuguese army had now crossed the Pyrenees to invade France itself. In Germany, the Kingdom of Bavaria had switched sides and joined the Sixth Coalition against France. While in Saxony, Napoleon faced four armies converging on him from all directions.
As I've heard from my German professor, Bavaria is like the Texas of Germany. They're very cool people. They don't like the Prussians, and they're just all around nice people. So yeah.
What's more, these were not the same bunglers he'd crushed in 1805 and 6 at Austerlitz and Jena. Prussia, Austria and Russia had all learned from their mistakes. They were now better organized, trained and led, and more wary of Napoleon. The largest coalition force was the Army of Bohemia, commanded by Austrian Field Marshal the Prince of Schwarzenberg. His was a huge mixed Austrian-Russian-Prussian army of 194,000 men and 790 guns.
So let's take a look at this. So Field Marshal von Schwarzenberg. He has his Advanced Guard, 2nd Corps, 3rd Corps Reserve, and the Cuirassiers, because of course the Cuirassiers are by themselves. They're the elite guys. They got the Russo-Prussian Reserve, so we got these. These are the... I say Russo-Prussian, but I'm looking at Russian flags. Yeah, these are basically all Russians. I think. Maybe Guard Corps 5 with the black is not. Man, I'm not good at that. And the South Wing, 1st and 4th Corps are both Russian. They have Cossacks, obviously, that are Russian. And then you have a lot more Russians down here with a group, Corps group Wittgenstein. It's 194,000 men and 790 guns. Those 790 guns are a lot of guns.
To the north, Blücher's army of Silesia, and the Army of the North under Napoleon's ex-Marshal Bernadotte, now Crown Prince of Sweden. Together.
So let's look at this one. 63,000 men, 310 guns. That's a lot of guns for 63,000 men. Yeah, 1st Corps looks like it's under... Well, I'm not really sure. Okay, the Swedish army. I see it. Army of the North, Crown Prince Bernadotte, 3rd Corps Wittgenstein. Oh man, and the Swedish army. I see the Swedish army. The rest of, man, I can't really tell old Prussian flags from Russian flags. So hey, there you go. Otherwise, 310 guns for the Army of Silesia is a lot for 63,000 men. That is a lot of firepower. Army of the North has 226 guns for 67,000. They have a lot of guns. They have over 1,000 guns if they combine. This is just those two armies.
Together, 130,000 men and 536 guns. To the southeast, General Bennigsen's Army of Poland, besieging Dresden. Another 34,000 men.
34,000 men with 135 guns. That's insane. They have a lot of firepower they're going in with this with.
And 135 guns. In total, the coalition had fielded 360,000 men and 1,500 guns, with Russia supplying the bulk of the troops.
360,000 men is actually, the Grand Army was bigger, but this 1,500 guns is a massive amount of firepower for this amount of men. This is, I almost say overkill, but hey, if you can bombard the enemy into submission, Napoleon would like to have these guns. You know, little Napoleon and his Grand Battery.
One unique addition to Bernadotte's Army of the North was a single troop of British rocket artillery, an experimental weapon system based on the Congreve rocket, a type seen here in 1830. Although wildly inaccurate, their high-explosive warhead could be devastating at close range.
Basically the first Katyusha rocket. They're also highly inaccurate. They're in Napoleon Total War, you can use them, but you will not hit the broadside of a barn. Maybe against fortifications it could be a lot better, but it's really inaccurate.
Napoleon's forces around Leipzig were outnumbered almost 2 to 1.
Looking at Napoleon's army, so he's got Ney as an army commander in the north wing. He's got Murat as a army commander in the south wing. He's got Sodam, Berthard, Marma, Renard, Eger. I have not heard these names before. I've heard of Marma. Those are all commanding corps: 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, 3rd Cavalry Corps. He has his guard, so Napoleon technically is directing all these guys instead of a marshal. So that's what this means. Ney is commanding these guys, and Murat are commanding these guys down here, and Ney down here, and Napoleon is assuming direct command of all of these guys. He's got his Imperial Guard under Montemir and Oudinot. He's got 9th Corps under wow, I cannot say. He's got 11th Corps under MacDonald. He's got 1st Corps under Latour Manberg. 2nd Corps under Sebastien. He's got 2 Cavalry Corps, 3 Infantry. Ney has 4 Infantry, 1 Cav, 3 Murat on the South Wing has 3 Infantry, 2 Cav. So he does not have a lot of cavalry in this army. Well, I say that. He has actually a pretty decent amount if he uses them. He's got 5 Cavalry and 9. Actually, he has a lot of cavalry here. Never mind. 200,000 men, 700 guns. Again, the Allies, if they combine, have 1,500 guns for 360,000 men. So you can see that he is trying to make up on the gun battery side.
But with 200,000 men and 700 guns, the Grande Armée was still a force to be reckoned with many experienced troops and commanders, even though it increasingly relied on young conscripts to make up numbers. There were another 140,000 men that Napoleon could not call on. General Rapp's 10th Corps besieged in Danzig, Marshal Saint-Cyr's 1st Corps besieged in Dresden, Marshal Davout's 13th Corps holding Hamburg, as well as several smaller besieged garrisons across Germany and Poland.
So technically he had around 300,000 guys, maybe even almost 400,000 guys, if he could combine his entire army against the coalition. But as he said, the garrisons, they're dealing with basically Russians at this point and Prussians. Hamburg, you may ask why 13th Corps is here. Very simple. 13th Corps is not on the map, but there are forces around here, and they need to hold Hamburg because it's an important city. One of the most important cities, actually, in Germany at this time. But basically, there's going to be skirmishing on this line, and they need to be able to deal with the situation out there.
Napoleon was currently about 20 miles north of Leipzig with the bulk of his army. Marshal Murat was 40 miles to the south with 90,000 men covering Schwarzenberg. Napoleon now decided to rapidly join Murat, and with their temporary superiority in numbers, defeat Schwarzenberg, before Bernadotte and Blücher could intervene.
And this makes sense. Defeated detail. Again, Napoleon's one of his favorite strategies. He's going to go smash Schwarzenberg instead of Blücher or Bernadotte. These would have been easier to smash, but probably they have an escape route that's easier. And he can regroup with Murat and take down Schwarzenberg. Because maybe, again, as you see, Murat is an entire army commander, which means he has a lot. He has about half the army, 1/3 of the army down here. So might as well regroup and smash Schwarzenberg. If he can beat Schwarzenberg, he can take down Bennigsen and Bernadotte and Blücher.
Murat had orders to conduct a fighting withdrawal northwards. But at Liebertz, he was drawn into major combat with the enemy's advance guard. Around 12,000 horsemen fought what some have described as the largest cavalry battle in Europe's history. Murat, in the thick of it as usual, was very nearly captured by Prussian dragoons. The battle ended in a minor coalition victory, with around 2,000 casualties on each side.
12,000 cavalrymen, you might very well have been the biggest cavalry on cavalry engagement in European history. The only thing that might be comparable would be the Polish Winged Hussars arriving in Vienna in the 1600s against the Ottomans. But that was against infantry, not cavalry versus cavalry. So that might actually be, that would be a sight to behold.
The next day, Napoleon arrived to take command.
Children, today is France's last day. Tonight, we must have one or all be dead. General Manson to the 16th Division, Leipzig, 16th of October. He is not wrong here. This is, for Napoleon, his Battle of the Bulge. This is everything. He cannot rebuild this army again. Everything is going to rest on this battle, whether this is the turning point in the war for him. Well, there are many turning points, so let's not get into whether France could have won or not. He had a half-decent chance of at least getting a peace here if he gave up everything in Germany and held on to France. But he's in Germany right now. But as I said, to the soldier of the time, this was the battle that is going to determine France's future.
By the 16th of October, Napoleon had concentrated most of his forces south of Leipzig. Field Marshal Schwarzenberg, meanwhile, against Russian advice, had deployed his army on either side of the Pleiße River, which would hinder his movements throughout the battle. Napoleon had entrusted the northern sector to Marshal Ney, with orders to keep an eye out for Blücher and Bernadotte. But Napoleon didn't expect them for at least another day, and so Ney had orders to transfer most of his troops south for the attack on Schwarzenberg.
So, I'm going to stop it at 7. Okay, now we can go back. Let's look at the positions that Napoleon was in at this time. Well, actually, the coalition first. Let's go with that. Schwarzenberg, against Russian advice, has deployed his men against the Pleiße River. So this is a river, and it's going to hinder his movement. I can already tell you that this is bad. What the Russians probably were saying was, why don't you deploy on this side with us so you can maneuver? Now, Schwarzenberg can argue, rightly, that maybe he can cross this side. However, this is a lot of difficult ground to cover, especially for troops of this kind, and artillery. This is almost unmovable for artillery going through this wood line. And there's a single bridge out here. And then if he's got his corps over here too, this is basically an action out of the battle. It's going to be covering a sector, but this river and all this terrain is not going to participate here. Not for a while, at least. And you can see that the Allies are deploying basically on this all the way down here, if you follow my mouse cursor, on this whole sector from Third Corps, looks like, all the way down to Guana and Rothan. Okay, from Kiel to Rothan is their deployed sector that they're going to fight against Napoleon, basically on this side. Now, if we look at Napoleon's troop composition, or where it is, he's going to order Ney to hold as basically as a watch out or rear. It's not a rear guard; it's more of a watch out position, or just watching for Blucher and Bernadotte to see if they're coming here. And he's going to redirect most of Ney's forces so he can't actually fight them off. This is important later. He's not going to be able to fight them off. And he's going to have them deploy to this battle, which in Napoleon's mind, this is the major threat, and I would agree with him at this current point. This is the major threat. Now you can see that this army over here, as I said, will be a non-factor. Let's take a look at its actual position. It's going to have to push against French forces that are in Lindau and have to make their way across this bridge. Okay? Now, this is possible. I don't think they're going to get across this bridge, but I could be wrong. But blocking this bridge is possible, at least on this side. So they're going to be a non-factor. These forces out here are going to be a non-factor in everything that's going to be happening here down near Leipzig. They could probably push to Lindau, maybe cut off, maybe push across to this side, maybe, and cut Leipzig off. But for all intents and purposes, they're not participating in this huge, massive battle I'll be carrying over here. Now, Napoleon is going to have a lot of guys down. He's going to fully be deploying his army against basically this Russian Bohemian Austrian army. And he's going to hold key cities: Donetsk, Marklenburg, Konowitz. And he's going to sit upon this. This looks like a position of a hill, and he's going to sit on it with his artillery and deploy his forces basically either to get hit or counterattack. I'm not sure. We'll continue the video, and we will see what happens.
Schwarzenberg, however, knew that Blucher and Bernadotte were closer than Napoleon suspected, and that Bennigsen was also marching up from Dresden. This was the moment the coalition had been waiting for.
Now you can see that they're coming in on literally every side. So Napoleon has done a perfect strategy, at least to get out in the north. Get out in the north or the northeast. He can at least try to get out. At least the deployment of his forces at the current time that he knows of. He knows these people are coming, but he doesn't know how fast. Schwarzenberg knows that they are coming faster than Napoleon thinks they will be here. If he gets encircled on all sides, he has to fight his way out somewhere.
All their armies converging on Napoleon, with overwhelming superiority in numbers. However, the coalition's headquarters were nothing like Napoleon's, where one man's will decided all. Schwarzenberg had to attempt to coordinate the actions of 3 large armies from 3 separate states. And although he was commander-in-chief, his plans still needed to be approved by Emperor Alexander, the supreme commander, whilst he also managed relations with the King of Prussia and the Emperor of Austria, all of whom were present at his headquarters.
Basically, what it's saying here is Napoleon, as soon as he issues an order, there is no question on if it's followed or not. As soon as he issues an order, it's going out, and it's to be followed. Schwarzenberg cannot do the same thing. Emperor Alexander, the man-child that he is in command of the army in theory and in total. So he technically reports to him. And he also technically reports to his king, which is Francis of Austria, and he also must talk with Frederick of William. So if he wants to issue an order, he's got to make sure all 3 headsheads agree to issue that order. And this is going to cause a massive delay. I already know this is going to cause a massive delay in orders.
The plan finally agreed was for General Wittgenstein's corps group to lead an attack in 4 main columns, with 2 Austrian flanking attacks west of the Pleiße.
So this general attack is basically all they're trying to do, at least this side, is probe this defenses and maybe break it. They're going to try to take Konowitz if they can, or at least block their escape. If they block their escape, that's a better idea. They're also going to try to block their escape at Lindau. If they can take this side without even taking the bridge, they can also block their escape.
At 8 a.m., a bombardment began along the line, as Russian, Austrian and Prussian infantry regiments advanced across cold, muddy fields. Wachau soon fell to Russian infantry, but French artillery fire made it impossible for them to advance further. Victor's 2nd Corps then counterattacked, retaking the village at bayonet point. Wachau would change hands twice more that morning. These bloody contests for small Saxon villages would come to typify the fighting around Leipzig. At Markkleeberg.
So basically what he's saying there is that the fighting, basically the majority of the fighting is going to be around these Saxon towns, which makes sense. These are strong points that can be defended. So, or hard points, let's put it that way. If they can either if they lose them, they have to start pulling back. If they win them, they can hold their ground or even push.
Kleist's Prussian 2nd Corps drove out the Polish defenders after bitter fighting. While on the left bank of the Pleiße, Merveldt's Austrian 2nd Corps struggled across broken ground to attack well-defended villages. Their assault on Konnewitz stalled, but with heavy losses, the Austrians got a toehold in Dörlitz. On the right flank, around 10 a.m, Klenau's 4th Corps occupied the high ground of the Kolmberg and fought its way into Liebertz. Napoleon, observing from Gallows Hill, ordered up Augereau's 9th Corps and the Young Guard in support.
Okay, this is very important to remember. He's going to use the 9th Guard because everyone that's behind Napoleon is basically in a reserve kind of formation, besides his left flank, which is commanded by the Polish. These guys are all reserve. The second Corps and 9th Corps, not really, but at least 9th Corps or 11th Corps, 11th Corps and 2nd Corps are going to be stringing it on this line, but everyone else is in reserve. So, as I said, Napoleon loves to use his Young Guard. They're his first reserve, and he sends them into fury and fire. They have, again, they get to pick from every regiment. They get to pick some of the best guys to go to this regiment or this unit. Let's put it that way. And they also see some of the heaviest fighting, and they are some of the best troops he has. You could even argue that the Young Guard was even better than the Old Guard in some cases. Sure, the Old Guard were older, but these guys definitely had more experience. Napoleon did not deploy his Old Guard for any reason, really, as we have seen many battles beforehand in this series, especially ones in Russia where he could have used them and really should have and might have won the battle. He didn't do that. His Old Guard are very experienced, no doubt about that. They're also very old. We're talking guys in their 30s, late 30s, 40s, 50s. The Young Guard are some of the best 20, 25, 30-year-olds he has, with some of the best leadership, and they are sent into fire, and that means that they have a lot of veterancy. So this is his first reserve that he's going to send in.
MacDonald's 11th Corps was now also arriving in position on his left. His troops retook the Kolmberg and counterattacked Liebertz, driving out the Austrians and pursuing them over the fields beyond. The advance was only halted when Russian Cossacks were sighted on their open left flank, a warning that Bennigsen's army was not far off.
Now you can see these Cossacks, basically there is nothing stopping them. They can whoop and hit guys behind the line, which is incredibly dangerous. You have two options as Napoleon. You shrink your line, so you pull 2nd Corps back and start holding down to your Holstein sign and basically make where my cursor is, like a 45-degree angle to block them off. Or you send your cavalry reserve to go deal with them. This is why you have reserves. Either send your cavalry reserves to go deal with them. If you send your cavalry reserves to deal with them, you have basically no one left but your Old Guard as a reserve, which is highly dangerous.
The coalition offensive was going nowhere, with most of its modest gains lost to French counterattacks. But there was one sector where the coalition had more success that morning. General Goulay's Austrian 3rd Corps, with orders to threaten Napoleon's line of retreat, advanced over marshy ground towards Lindenau. Ney had to divert Bertrand's 4th Corps to reinforce the village and ensure the road to France was kept open.
And that makes sense. Really, that general for 3rd Corps doesn't really have to do much. All he has to really do is attack the sector, and he'll probably win. It doesn't take brains to take Lindau. If he had a lot of brains, he would know that if he can rush it, any reinforcements that Napoleon could send, or Ney, in this case, would be mute, because they'd have to cross a bridge, and crossing a bridge into fire like that is a death sentence. So
Napoleon was waiting for Ney's reinforcements before launching his attack on Schwarzenberg.
But Ney had just sent his reinforcements to Third Corps, so Napoleon's not getting his reinforcements, at least not as many as he hoped.
But now, Fourth Corps was tied down at Lindenau, and there was more bad news from Ney. Blücher's army of Silesia was approaching from the northwest. Marmont's Sixth Corps had to turn about to keep the Prussians at bay. Heavy
Now, this is bad. There's no two ways about this. But they are at least in very defensible ground. They have basically a very small front that they can fight on, because this is a river or a stream or something. I'm guessing a river, or at least a decent stream, and they're on this side. They can at least form a circular perimeter and try and hold them off.
Fighting broke out around Meukern, the village itself held by elite French Marines.
French Marines, not a statement you hear a lot of.
While Dąbrowski's Polish division clung on to Wiedrich under attack from an entire Russian corps. This was a nasty surprise for Napoleon, who'd thought Blücher was still a day's march away. But the old Prussian general, hearing cannon fire to the south, had urged his men on and into the attack. Blücher intended to draw as many French troops onto himself as possible to assist Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia. His actions and the bloody fight for Meukern may just have saved the coalition from defeat.
Now, that is a must have almost saved the coalition from defeat. So, yeah, Napoleon's not going to win this battle. Basically, Blücher is trying to get Napoleon to suck up all of his forces down here and buy the guys in the south time, because maybe they can win by themselves. And that is a good strategy, especially if you can start diverting Ney and all of his corps out here. Now all hell was let loose. It seemed impossible that there could be any space between the bullets and the balls which rained onto us. Unknown Russian officer, Leipzig, 16th of October, 1813.
Napoleon was outnumbered across the whole battlefield. But in the south, he still had a numerical advantage.
So let's just take a look at his current situation, at least from my perspective, with that before we talk about this. All right. So Napoleon obviously does not have a bird's eye view. He only really sees what's going on down here. Ney is completely up here to do whatever he needs to do, and Ney can't actually see this corps down here near Lindau. He just can't. So, looking at the battle as it is proceeding as of right now, Napoleon has at least a good, if not better, chance of beating these guys in the coalition down south. Lindau is a disaster waiting to happen. If the Austrian Third Corps can push Lindau and break this, France can't escape. No one can basically escape, so this must be held at all costs. Ney is getting attacked by Blücher and soon Bernadotte. So, if I were him, he is fighting a delaying action, which is admirable, to give Napoleon time down here to win. If Napoleon can win down here, maybe he can swing north and finish Blücher off. Or maybe buy time and send guys down here against Third Corps and smash them out. Ney has a bit of room to play with. He can start falling back to Golis and Urchensee, and then he could fall back even further if he blew that bridge to a defensive line north of Leipzig with a stream on his right. If he could pull out, but I'm not sure he can at this point because he's currently engaged.
Napoleon was outnumbered across the whole battlefield. But in the south, he still had a numerical advantage. Not as large as he'd hoped, nor likely to last long. Schwarzenberg and Alexander were already moving up reserves, though Schwarzenberg now found that his were on the wrong side of the Pleiße River.
I could have told him that. I mean, he should have known that. That's not a mistake you just make. That's him being incompetent. He was told that he should deploy his guys here so that he has a more flexible reserve. But these guys, I guarantee you, are going to have to turn all the way around, go through boggy forests, and then assist in this attack. So it's going to be a long time before they get into action. You could see that maybe Schwarzenberg could send these guys forward, but again, I would already tell him that this boggy fight is going to be too much. I don't know why his cavalry are here. This is monumentally stupid. What are cavalry gonna? I can see his infantry. I could even see his cannons being here. Okay, I have no idea what his cavalry are doing here. Have you tried to get a horse through a forest? It's not exactly easy. It's not easy for you to walk through a forest that's thick, okay? Let alone send a cavalry detachment or corps through it. I don't know what they're doing. If I really don't know what they're doing here. If they I'm thinking like they could be his rear guard, but Napoleon doesn't have any forces to send around him, so I really don't know what they're doing. They should have been on this side.
Costing precious hours. It was now or never for Napoleon. At 2 p.m,
this is do or die time.
He ordered the attack to begin. A grand battery of 180 guns blasted the enemy lines. Then Victor's 2nd Corps, Lauriston's 5th Corps, and the Young Guard began their advance. In support, Murat gathered 2 entire cavalry corps, 10,000 horsemen, and led them in one of the great mass cavalry charges of the Napoleonic Wars. Cuirassiers of the 1st Heavy Cavalry Division broke through to the main enemy battery. Some even nearly reached the 3 coalition monarchs. But the ground was marshy and broken by fences and ditches. The French horses were soon exhausted and the squadrons disordered.
But that is a good use of cavalry. Send them in with infantry is coming with them, and send them in to break through this line. And they almost got to the monarchs. That would have been something. If you capture if they captured these monarchs, that's it. War's over. That's it. Britain might be able to continue, but every single one of these monarchs has to sign a peace treaty, because at this time, a monarchy is still head of government and head of state. They get taken, that's it. War's over. But yeah, again, heavy cuirassiers. Cuirassiers are some of your best heavy cavalrymen that you have. Basically, your knights of this period. I say that.
Austrian cuirassiers and Russian Guard cavalry were coming up from the south. When these fresh Allied cavalry reserves charged the French, a great melee ensued. But the French were eventually driven back to their start line. Maison's division of the 5th Corps was involved in a desperate struggle for Geldengosse. The fighting swept back and forth through the village, the streets filling with dead and wounded from both sides. But as Russian and Prussian Guard regiments arrived to reinforce the village, the French were forced to fall back. Around 4 p.m, the Austrian Reserve Corps finally arrived and renewed the assault on Markkleeberg, one of the morning's objectives, which was finally secured. By 5 p.m, it was clear that Napoleon didn't have enough reserves to force a decisive outcome in the south.
No, he doesn't. What he did try to do is pretty good. It tried to work. Or at least gave it his best shot. But the Allies have their reserves they sent forward. They just beat back Napoleon. At this point, it's 5 p.m. and the fighting is getting intense, and also it's starting to become night. So you're either going to have to start pulling out, or something has to start happening real fast.
To the north, Meukern was being stubbornly held by French Marines with lethal close-range artillery support. But despite terrible losses, York's Prussian Corps continued to attack. Marshal Marmont himself was wounded twice, but remained in command. Finally, a brilliant...
Marshal Marmont is actually at least a half-decent general and field marshal, if I remember correctly. And yeah, he got wounded twice, and he's not leaving the field to seek medical attention, because he is trying his best to buy time for Napoleon here.
brilliant charge by Prussian hussars triggered a French rout. Merkern fell as Marmont's corps streamed back towards Leipzig. As dusk fell around 6 p.m, fighting died out across the battlefield. The first day of the battle had cost the French an estimated 25,000 casualties. The coalition, at least 30,000.
And that makes sense. The coalition was attacking, France is defending. So those aren't exactly amazing numbers on the defending side. Well, I say defending and attacking, but I mean, Napoleon was attacking too, so, but that's at least pretty good for France.
Napoleon had come close, but failed to land a decisive blow. The chance for victory was slipping from his grasp.
Eighth Corps have lost a third of their men and officers. All ammunition stocks have been used up. We have enough to maintain combat for 1 hour. That means they are out of basically everything. And Marshal Poniatowski is the only Polish, actually the only person that was not French, to be awarded a marshal. And I believe he got it before this battle, and he dies here.
Sunday the 17th of October brought a lull, with both armies exhausted by the previous day's fighting. Napoleon needed to rest his troops and resupply them with ammunition, which was running dangerously low. He also sent a message to his father-in-law, Emperor Francis I, suggesting an armistice and finally offering concessions. But the Allies were no longer interested. They knew time was on their side.
Yep. Napoleon is now trying to backtrack from his earlier peace offering that the Austrian ambassador gave him, basically. And they're just not buying it or taking it at this point because they know the time's on their side and they'll probably win eventually.
The only major combat that day occurred in the north, where Blücher continued to attack. Russian infantry stormed Eutrich and Gorlice. Russian hussars charged and routed part of Arrighi's 3rd Cavalry Corps. That day, Napoleon received 14,000 reinforcements when Reynier's French Saxon 7th Corps arrived from the northeast.
Ney's position out here is looking very dangerous. You have to send at least some guys out here to hold this line because there's a lot of Russians and Prussians coming down here, and they could easily take Leipzig and endanger literally everything. And as he said, the 7th Corps is going to be vital. Either Napoleon uses it in the south for a decisive engagement, or he sends it north to buy more time. Because they don't even hold the bridges anymore, and they didn't blow them. It's not looking very good for Ney up here.
But the same day, the coalition received more than 100,000 reinforcements, as their armies continued to converge on Leipzig. Colloredo's Austrian 1st Corps, Bennigsen's Army of Poland.
See, infantry out here would be good. Oh, man.
And Bernadotte's Army of the North, though the latter was widely criticized for his leisurely march to the battlefield.
And taking your time is not necessarily bad, but especially if you're in an engagement like this, it does mean a lot. If he could force march here and have been here at least the very end of the first day, he could have been here to attack on the second day. But
the next day, Napoleon would face odds of nearly 2 to 1. It was time for the Emperor to begin planning his retreat.
Yeah, he's almost completely encircled here. He has to get out. I mean, this is a trap. I write to you on the morning of battle, the like of which has scarcely been seen in the history of the world. We have surrounded the French Emperor. This battle will decide the fate of Europe. General von Gneisenau, letter to his wife, the 18th of October. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau actually were pretty, I think, pretty close friends, and also they were generals of the same, time period. And my daddy's already dead, so.
On Monday morning, the sun shone across 40 square miles of battlefield, on which nearly 500,000 troops and 2,000 cannon were assembled. Soldiers from France, Germany, Russia, Austria, Poland, Italy, Sweden, the Netherlands, and even Britain. This was truly the Battle of the Nations.
Yep, that is very true. It is the Battle of the Nations, everyone. So looking at Napoleon's boned here. He has 160,000 men versus 700 guns. The coalition of 295,000 men and 1,300 guns. And Napoleon, remember, is technically not fighting a defensive battle in France. He is fighting in Germany. This wouldn't be so bad if he was fighting on his home soil and could pick his ground, but he didn't. He went. He basically went to the coalition for this battle.
Assembled. Soldiers from France, Germany, Russia, Austria, Poland, Italy, Sweden, the Netherlands, and even Britain. This was truly the Battle of the Nations. In preparation for his withdrawal, Napoleon pulled back his forces into a tighter defensive perimeter and ordered Bertrand's 4th Corps to march west to secure the army's line of retreat. 2 divisions of the Young Guard under Marshal Mortier took their place at Lindenau.
4th Corps is going to secure his line of retreat. This makes sense. That's a lot of guys to send to secure a line of retreat, but this makes sense. He's got to pull out. His Young Guard, he sent one of his, if not his best unit, again, to hold the bridge crossing, because this is absolutely vital. If I was there, imagine, I would have deployed the Old Guard and the Young Guard to Lindau. I would have even had them make an attack, maybe on 3rd Corps, depends on the situation. But the Young Guard and the Old Guard against 3rd Corps would surely win. But you would have to leave somebody to hold Lindau. But Napoleon is going to keep his Old Guard, again, because he doesn't like to use it. It's not a very big reserve amount, mind you, but it is very experienced. And he has shrunken his perimeter so that he can start pulling guys out to Leipzig and get out.
Schwarzenberg, meanwhile, planned to close the net on Napoleon with 6 converging attacks. Fighting in the south began around 8 a.m.
So before we continue, let's see if the Old Guard is used in this battle at all. If it is not, I would have strongly suggested Napoleon send them to Lindau, but we're about to see if they are used in any other way.
The Austrians took Dörlitz, but Marshal Oudinot led a counterattack at the head of a Young Guard division and drove them out again. Schwarzenberg was so alarmed by this reverse that he sent orders to recall Goulay's 3rd Corps. General Barclay...
That is impressive. He can recall that. Yeah, all right. Maybe this Austrian general is not all he seems to be. This doesn't seem to exactly be the brightest bulb in the shed, if you get my meaning.
His troops initially faced little opposition as they took Wachau and Liebert-Volkwitz, scenes of such bitter fighting 2 days before, but now scarcely defended. Barclay then paused, waiting for Bennigsen to get into position on his right, before continuing his attack.
And he has to get in position, so Bennigsen needs to move everyone up. You can't just launch an attack like this without a strong support on the right, because all that would happen is that the reserves would be able to be shifted here to blow your core, basically destroy your core, and then go back to their original position. So he needs to wait for Bennigsen to attack with him.
Bennigsen's troops had more ground to cover, but towards noon, they'd driven back MacDonald's infantry and taken their objectives. They would now wait for Bernadotte's army to link up on their right. But the Army of the North was again making slow progress, for which many again blamed its commander, who seemed exceedingly cautious about facing his old master in battle.
There could be many reasons as to, I won't speculate. That's kind of the point of me watching my reaction, is for me to speculate, I guess. he doesn't want to lose his men unnecessarily. Now, he probably knows there's going to be another battle after this, at least in his head. And he is very slow in sending his guys forward. But this is going to lead to problems here, because if his guys are already in position, they could really hammer Napoleon's where he couldn't pull guys off the line. But because he is taking his time, he's gonna be able to at least shift guys out, or maybe pull them out, or at least hold a position longer, rather than him sending his guys. I really don't know. Again, he was criticized at the time for not going forward enough.
Blücher, in contrast, did not hesitate to launch Russian infantry against Leipzig's northern defences, though their attack failed with heavy losses.
I mean, if you attack a bridge, and even if they have muskets on the other side, it's not likely going to go well for you. If all were demoralized and he appeared, his presence was like an electric shock. All shouted, "Viva la Emperor! Viva la Emperor! Viva la Emperor," is what I would say. And everyone charged blindly into fire. Sergeant Major Johann Rohingen, French voltigeur at Leipzig, so a light infantry guy. So this is why Wellington said, at least in the movie, those we'll see if we can watch, that Napoleon himself was worth 50,000 men because of his presence. If he was near guys, it would reinvigorate them to keep fighting.
By 2 p.m, Napoleon was hard-pressed on all fronts, but holding his own. His attention was now focused on Probstheide, key to his southern front, under attack from Kleist's Prussian Second Corps. French troops had turned the village into a fortress and inflicted terrible losses on the advancing Prussians. Probstheide was soon engulfed in smoke and fire as fighting raged on all sides. Some Prussian regiments lost half their men attacking the village, while 3 French generals were killed as they organised its defence. Napoleon even sent in Friant's division of the Guard to reinforce the position. To the north, Bernadotte's army
You could say that's a little deployment of the old guard, but
was finally joining the battle in earnest. Marmont had assembled 137 guns around Schönefeld, which poured fire into the Russian ranks. In response, Bernadotte massed 200 guns of his own. The fields were soon strewn with the dead and wounded, as the sheer weight of fire made it impossible for either side to advance. Around 3 p.m, von Bülow's Prussian Corps, supported by Austrian Jaegers and its small British rocket detachment, attacked Paunsdorf. Grenier's 7th Corps could not withstand the onslaught. An hour later, around 3,000 Saxon soldiers rushed over to the enemy and surrendered. The Saxons were deeply disillusioned with their French allies. Their main wish now was for a quick end to a war that had ravaged their homeland for many months. The hole in the line created...
When you just have units start surrendering like that, that's awful. This is one of the downsides of having an army of many nations, is the loyalty of everyone is not exactly the same. Whether versus an entire British or an entire American or whatever, you know what you're fighting for, and everyone's morale is basically the same. But if you have different guys, it makes sense why the Saxons would do this, but it's not exactly good for the French.
Created by the Saxons' defection was soon plugged by Guard cavalry. But the coalition juggernaut could not be stopped.
So, he sent his Guard cavalry against 3rd Corps. That is a valid use of the cavalry at this point, and a good use of the Guard. So there we go, that answers my question on whether or not you're going to use the Guard now.
Towards dusk, under relentless Russian pressure, Marmont abandoned the burning ruins of Schönefeld, while the Prussians took Sellerhausen. In the south, Probstheide still held, but the situation was grim for Napoleon.
And it looks very grim. And I'll just mention this. Austrian general, not exactly the brightest bulb, because if he kept Third Corps here, he could at least pressure Napoleon, or maybe even try to surround him. I gotta pull out to send reserves. Because again, I was suggesting that maybe we send the old and young guard against Third Corps, but why would you need to do that if the general's like, nah, let's leave? Yeah, Napoleon was validated on this point. I'll give him that.
The third day's fighting cost both sides another 25,000 casualties. Napoleon's army was exhausted, outnumbered, virtually encircled, and critically low on ammunition. Finally, the Emperor gave the order to retreat.
Sire, we will hold on. We are ready to die for your majesty. Marshal Poniatowski to Napoleon on receiving orders to form a rear guard. This tells you how dangerous being in a rear guard is. He knew, and so did Napoleon, that they weren't making it out of here. Maybe a few of them could make it out, and they were ready to die to buy time for the rest of the army to get out. It shows you the loyalty of Polish people, and their willingness to fight on.
Overnight, under cover of darkness and early morning fog, the French army withdrew behind Leipzig's walls, and at 4 a.m. began its retreat west, crossing the single bridge over the Elster River that led back to France. There'd been time and materials to build extra bridges, but in what would prove a serious oversight, no one had given the necessary orders.
If they knew they were pulling out, at least the day before. The day before was all about fighting retreat. They could have built more bridges. Oh man. And even as you mentioned today, they could have, if somebody issued the orders, to build more bridges so they could get across faster. That is just a massive, massive mistake. Even on Napoleon, that's just a massive mistake, because he could have also ordered it. And he ordered the Polish to stay behind, which is going to be a sad thing. I would have probably ordered the old guard. Well, the old guard, if they get across the river, they can set up a better defensive position that will not break. Again, you have to think of the old guard as a do not break unit. If they were to hold Leipzig, they could buy you more time, but the Polish are going to do it, so.
Furthermore, there was no clear plan for Leipzig's defence, which was left to a jumble of under-strength units, mostly Poles and Germans. Napoleon left Leipzig around 10 a.m. Behind him there were scenes of mounting chaos and confusion, the city's streets jammed with troops, guns and wagons. The 20,000 wounded troops in the city had little hope of escape.
That's one, that's horrible. Can't even get the wounded out, and two, Napoleon's already left at 10 a.m. and he didn't issue orders to defend Leipzig. Napoleon has definitely lost his edge by this time. He won't fully lose it, as we'll see in the Battle of France in 1814, which in my personal opinion, is Napoleon's masterstroke on how he's able to defend his own country. I think it's one of his best campaigns he will ever wage in 1914. But again, there's no plan. There's no coherent plan on the defense. You have left the Germans and the Poles to defend, not the French, because let's be very honest here. It is more acceptable to send other nations to die rather than your own men, and the wounded are going to be left behind, which is retarded on numerous reasons. Because one, those wounded can come back to action if they are saved. Two, they can become instructors and veterans because, they didn't die and weren't captured. They'd also be... There's many reasons why you want to save your wounded other than it's the right thing to do.
30 minutes later, shells began to rain on the city as the coalition launched an all-out assault from north, east and south.
And if Napoleon was here, I guarantee you the defenses would have held a lot longer. And there would have been some order to this, but he's gone, so.
The rear guard held the city's gates for as long as they could, but they were soon overwhelmed by the enemy, and savage street fighting broke out across the city. A barge packed with gunpowder had been moored beneath the Elster bridge so that it could be quickly destroyed after the rearguard crossed. Around 2 p.m, a corporal lit the fuse when he saw Russian soldiers on the far bank, even though the bridge was still packed with troops, wagons and horses. The bridge was destroyed in a gigantic explosion that trapped 30,000 men and 30 generals on the wrong side of the river. Panic broke out among those who suddenly found themselves cut off. Most became prisoners, but some tried to swim for it, including the Polish Prince Poniatowski, made a marshal by Napoleon just 3 days before. Weak from his wounds, he rode his horse into the river, but as it tried to climb the steep far bank, it rolled over him, and he was drowned. Marshal MacDonald had also been cut off by the blast, and resolved to escape or die trying. He found a place where engineers had cut down 2 trees as a makeshift bridge, and made his attempt. And there I was, 1 foot on either trunk and the abyss below me. A high wind was blowing. I was wearing a large cloak, and fearing that someone would grab at it, I got rid of it. I was already 3/4 of the way across when some men decided to follow me. Their unsteady feet caused the trunks to shake, and I fell into the water. Fortunately, I could touch the bottom, but the bank was steep, the soil loose and slippery. Some of the enemy's skirmishers came up. They fired at me point blank and missed me, and some of our men who happened to be nearby drove them off and helped me out. I was wet from head to foot, breathless and sweating heavily from my efforts. Marshal Marmont, who had got across early in the day, gave me a horse. I wanted dry clothes more, but they were not to be had. The loss of the bridge turned what was already a heavy defeat for Napoleon into a disastrous one.
That is a very true statement. 30,000 men, as that corporal blew the bridge too early, let's put it that way. I don't know why it wasn't placed on the second bridge, further up north, or further to the west. That would have been a better place to blow the bridge, but there was no plan. Let's put it that way. It's simple. There was no plan, and this is what happens when you have no plan. And those 30,000 men, they're basically screwed. As soon as that bridge was blown, it was over. They're either going to be POWs, killed, or try to get across. And as you say, Marshal Poniatowski was been wounded, and he tried to make it across, and he died from drowning. And Marshal MacDonald also tried. He's going to become a Marshal of France. He's going to become basically the highest ranking general in France after the Napoleonic Wars. And he barely got out.
Later that day, the 3 Allied monarchs met in the centre of Leipzig to celebrate their great victory. It had come at enormous cost. Exact numbers are impossible to establish, but in 4 days' fighting, the coalition armies suffered at least 52,000 casualties. Napoleon, who could less afford such losses, came off worse. 47,000 killed and wounded, 35,000 taken prisoner, 325 guns lost.
And I mean, this was his own fault. It's not even like you can be like, well, he didn't have... No, this was his own fault. Not this number. This is okay. This is going to happen because he fought here. Let's just throw that number out, okay? This 35,000 prisoners and 325 guns lost, this is all on him. This is because he didn't build enough bridges, he didn't buy time, he didn't even try to defend the city with himself or his guard. This is all on him. And this is going to come back to absolutely wreck Napoleon in 1814.
125 guns lost. More men were killed and wounded at Leipzig than in any European battle before the First World War.
that is impressive because you're looking at this 52,000 and 47,000. That's around 100,000 men killed and wounded. And again, it takes till around World War I for this to get to the same number.
Leipzig than in any European battle before the First World War. Sir George Jackson, the British ambassador to Austria, rode over the battlefield with Metternich, the Austrian foreign minister, 2 days later. "A more revolting and sickening spectacle I never beheld," he wrote. "Scarcely could we move forward a step without passing over the dead body of some poor fellow, gashed with wounds and clotted with blood, another perhaps without an arm or a leg, here and there a headless trunk, or a head only, which caused our horses to stumble or start aside. It made one's blood run cold to glance upon the upturned faces of the dead. We got over this field of glory as quickly as we could."
Now, that statement is going to be why the Congress of Vienna is going to be held, and they are going to make sure that there is a balance of power in Europe, and this does not happen again, at least and they're really successful at it. You have the Franco-Prussian War, and you have wars in between, but there's nothing like this until the First World War. And the reason is because this war was so devastating for Europe that they wanted to make sure that this would not happen again. And that's why the Congress of Vienna is going to be the way it is. All Europe was marching with us just a year ago. Today, all Europe is marching against us. Napoleon to the Senate, the 14th of November, 1813. Well, sir, that's not really true in 1812, but okay. Again, the Prussians and the Swedish finally joined, and the Austrians. So at least in his mind, it makes sense. But
Napoleon had suffered a calamitous defeat. He had lost the battle for Germany. His domination of Europe appeared at an end. With 80,000 survivors, he began a fighting retreat to the French border.
Now, so you can see that he abandoned 30,000 guys and 30 generals across that river when it blew up, and he got out. Now, I'm not going to speculate. Well, I do speculate. So I can tell you that in 1815, when he comes back to power, some of the marshals, many of them, do not rejoin Napoleon. And if you take Leipzig, and if they were there at Leipzig and they did not want to join him, you can see a direct correlation as to why. He abandoned his army, he abandoned his generals, and they had to fight to get out. That's not exactly going to endear those marshals and generals to Napoleon. I don't believe MacDonald joined. Actually, I know for a fact MacDonald didn't join Napoleon in 1815 because he was restored as one of the best marshals in France. Highest marshal in France after the Bourbon Restoration, after Napoleon was dethroned the second time. And a lot of generals and field marshals don't follow Napoleon in 1815. And I could see a reason right here as to why, because this is give you a very good reason why you shouldn't follow Napoleon, because he'll just abandon you, at least in their head.
There was now no chance of rescue for the 100,000 men trapped in garrisons across Germany and Poland, though some would hold out for another 5 months. Marshal Murat took his leave of the Emperor, assuring him of his loyalty, but secretly planning to cut a deal with the Allies to save his throne in Naples.
"Yes, my Emperor, I promise I will be loyal," as he runs away. "Help, help, I surrender."
It was the last time the two men saw each other.
Yeah, I believe Murat is killed in the revolution or another reason, but they do not accept him keeping the Kingdom of Naples, put it that way.
11 days after the Battle of Leipzig, Napoleon's former allies, the Bavarians, tried to block his escape at Hanau with 40,000 men. The Bavarian commander, von Wrede, had served with Napoleon in many campaigns. But on seeing his deployment for battle, Napoleon remarked, "I made him a count, but I couldn't make him a general." The French emperor...
I made him a count, so I made him a count of governorship, but I couldn't make him a general, which means I couldn't make him my own general, I think. I'm not really sure.
then ordered the Imperial Guard to lead an attack that forced the enemy to fall back in disarray.
Yeah, there we go, we used the guard that time.
French army reached the safety of Mainz 3 days later. Napoleon himself pushed on to Paris to contain the political damage from his defeat. Behind him, his empire was being dismantled. On the 4th of November, the coalition announced the dissolution of the Confederation of the Rhine, several of its former members now joining the war against France.
And you know that Mainz is a German city today, so that is actually pretty far into Germany proper, at least today. It's not actual France, but...
In the Illyrian provinces, local revolts, Austrian invasion, and British naval support brought an end to French rule. In North Italy, Eugene was retreating steadily before the advance of von Hiller's Austrian army. While in Hamburg, Marshal Davout, with 34,000 troops, would soon be cut off and under siege. Napoleon's situation was desperate. But in the next campaign...
Before we get there, what is about to happen in 1814? You need Davout. I don't know why he didn't bring it. Okay, Napoleon didn't bring him back because he thought he could, I don't know, miraculously win against the Allies and somehow retake Europe grandiose style. Davout is going to be important. He should have realized that this is no longer a battle to keep what he had. This is a battle for France itself, for the heartland of France. At that point, I mean, the rest of the garrisons, they can't get out. There's literally nothing they can do. But Davout can still get out. If he can get out into Paris, those 34,000 men could really make a difference in the defense of France.
Fought for France itself. Napoleon would prove that he was still the master of war.
And yes, the Battle of France, I state, is one of the best defensive campaigns waged in a home country ever. We're still about to see why Napoleon still has it. So that's the end of the video. So I don't know how long this video turned out to be. Probably an hour and a half by myself. But hope you guys liked that and enjoyed that. Write your comments. Otherwise, the next video will be the Battle of France. If that video is up, it should be up there, I believe. And you can click that from this video to go watch that one. And the playlist will also be up there. So, other than that, my last final thoughts here are Napoleon. Those 30,000 guys shouldn't have happened there. But hey, what you gonna do in those generals? But that's it. So, hope you guys liked the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like, subscribe. Otherwise, people have a nice day.